apparently it appears not. And now the question is if countries, for example, Florida would not grant the 10 million or whatever, we had the audacity to ask for almost $1 billion for war, but we wouldn't get with it. That's outside the point, but
What's the point now?
the point is we are not willing to give the aid, but under certain circumstances, colonialism or mutual government coalitions may provide. If we are able to step in and exploit some of their other resources, we may provide, education, medical care, etc. But unless we are able to get something, unless there's something in it for us, we are not prepared to make the donations needed to feed these people. And so you have to reconsider now some sort of government in which someone has to step in and take over where people have apparently not been able to take care of their own people. I mean, in the 60s there was this big fervor over their independence. This was made by the elitist, educated people. They're apparently not like outside rule, which has been going on for a century or two. And so the question now is the political trends which will go on, and more precisely the social conflicts stemming from lack of education, the overpopulation because of birth control, etc. And so what is the world's position going to be outside of?
I'm not sure what you want from me. Your analysis, it's kind of taken us over a number of subjects. When you mentioned the miracle grains, you're right, absolutely. They take with it. It's amazing how tied up the energy crisis and crunch is with the food crisis, and it takes a lot of fertilizer, a lot of energy, period, to grow these things. And the countries that can really dramatically increase their yields, the really hungry world, the countries that can least afford to buy the fuel, the fertilizer, the petrochemicals, the whole bit. You're absolutely right.
The point is that isn't at the heart of the matter. That's a temporary solution, but that you're not really getting at what's down at the roots of the problem.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, are we going to just continue to give away food, or are we going to, people are going to start to grow their own, right?
Right.
Okay, fair enough question.
We're taking care of immediate needs, but we're not really getting at what is behind all these touchwood problems.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, sir.
Would you say in some countries the situation is one of our supporting the existing military government?
Well, I mean, I don't know where you're talking about.
Like today, you said that.
Oh, yeah, okay, sure. Chad is a good example now. Chad just had a coup yesterday, but when I was in Africa, the U.S. Air Force was flying in food to Chad. And again, it was flying food to the north where the army was located in Chad, and most of the refugees were in the south. Sure. We seem to give away food, we give away food government to government rather than, people here in this room who are concerned about the situation to people who need it. It doesn't work that way. The transfers aren't there. We give away the food to the government and kind of, if they're, maybe and maybe not, sort of monitor what happens to it and kind of keep our fingers crossed that it ever really trickles down to the people who need it. And that's really, that's kind of the size of it, I think. Now, in Southeast Asia, you'll find, in Bangladesh and India, you'll find the food aid being given by the United States to the various relief organizations, CARE, UNICEF, World Vision, Church World Services, and the Red Cross, and they'll make the distribution. And there, it's a little bit more efficient, I think. The rip-offs come on the docks or in the go-downs, the warehouses. In Africa, it's government to government, and I think that's where you find the most blatant sort of black marketeering and corruption. But that's just kind of a journalist's view and a very general sort of thing. Henry Kamm in the New York Times wrote a really good series of articles last October and November about this precise question. It caused the relief effort in Chad to be suspended, and I'm not sure if we broke diplomatic relations with them. Who really cares if we did, except that, this series of articles exposing what was happening to the American food really caused a fuss. So if you're interested, go back to the Times last October. Yes?
I understand that you also will write.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you need to supplement the photograph with writing?
Well, I think, of course, ideally we take photographs that communicate you know, with visual symbols, and you can look at that picture and instantly understand it, and you get some sort of a message, or, you know, there's some meaning there. But you know, if you're trying to tell a story as a journalist now, okay, I mean, there are things that are best said in words and things that are best said in pictures, okay? And ideally, these should sort of complement one another, I think. So yes, I wrote it. We did two articles, really. We did an article called "Can the World Feed Its People?" We did an article about the famine in Bangladesh, and I wrote the article about the famine in Bangladesh. And it's one thing to look at those pictures, as kind of stark as they are, and yet, I mean, you want some more information about this too, right? And I provided that, I hope, with a commentary a little bit tonight. And you know, you do that with your article too. And I think together, let's hope they form some sort of a package. Yes, sir.
What was your film?
We use three kinds of film. It's all color slides, all 35 millimeter. Kodachrome, the two kinds of Kodachrome, 25 and 64, and high-speed Ektachrome. And I guess we probably use more Kodachrome 64 than anything else. It's reasonably fast, and it's got nice sort of, the quality is good, and you know, seems to take a lot of punishment. You go to a place like Southeast Asia in the middle of the monsoon season, and you can get rained on and have a sleazy hotel with no air conditioning, and it all seems to, it doesn't seem to deteriorate or anything. So we use Kodak film. Kodak processes our film just like it processes your film. No special effects, no special filters, and no special treatment. Surprisingly, our film goes to Kodak every afternoon at 3 o'clock, and it comes back every morning at 8. And it, you know, sometimes they make mistakes with my pictures too. Yes.
Did you ever have to pay your subjects to take the picture?
Well, nobody. I guess the only place that I've ever been asked to pay for a picture was in Kenya, the Maasai tribesmen. They're so used to having foreign tourists motoring by in their Land Rovers and microbuses, stopping and say, "Oh yes, these quaint natives, let's stop and take a picture of this guy with a spear." But now they say, you know, $5 for a picture of me with my spear. But other than that, no. Now in Bangladesh, I'm not sure that money at the point where I saw most of these people would really do any good, but people told me if you pulled out some money, it would start a riot, so I took them at their word. I gave my driver, or my guide, or my assistant, whatever, some money. And then after I photographed these people, you know, he was a Bengali. He went and gave them each the equivalent of a couple of US dollars, so that, I mean, if they could get out of that camp or could bribe some official, they could buy some more food. And I think that's only fair. I mean, you impose, I mean, you know, you ask, I mean, you're imposing a great deal, I think, on these people to kind of portray their suffering, and that's kind of the least you could do. So, sure, you give something to people, but it's not that they would demand it or anything like that. Most of them are rather oblivious to the fact that you're there, I think. Malnutrition or near starvation is really kind of a demeaning sort of thing. Most of the, people are in a state of semi-consciousness, and I've seen children on the streets of cities in Bangladesh, Dhaka, and whatever, who have food in front of them, and yet they're falling asleep. Really, falling asleep in a squatting position or standing up because they just don't have the energy to function anymore. So that, for the most part, these people are fairly unaware of your presence, and unless you look like a weirdo with 10 cameras and everything around your shoulders. Yeah. Yeah. He was a Sikh. This was in the Punjab.
How come the Sikhs are always the big guys, the policemen, the soldiers, and they always have the food?
Well, I am not qualified to speak about the culture of India. I really, I'm not going to tackle that because I just get myself in trouble. I spent 3 weeks in India. I really can't say, and I wish I could answer your question. You'll have to corner somebody who knows more about it. Yes, ma'am. Good question. Yeah, I mean, has this affected your personal life? Well, yeah, I was a lieutenant in Vietnam, and I thought that I had seen about the worst that I could ever see in Vietnam, but that was to my friends. And yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of unimaginable until you get there in a place like Bangladesh and see people dying every day. And you come back, and I guess you feel bitter like you felt when you came back from Vietnam because nobody cares. I remember getting off the plane, and I took a Northwest Orient 747 home from Asia last summer, and I'd been in Asia about 3.5 months. And I remember getting off the plane in O'Hare Airport, and everybody looked like a giant. They really looked like giants. I thought I was on another planet for the first 15 minutes. Everybody looked so fat and well-fed, and you know, I'm from the Midwest. I can get away with saying this. You know, my parents are German. They look, you know, very hefty Germans. All that, you know, lots of food there. And yeah, it just really blew my mind. And I think maybe after the bitterness that you feel when you come home and nobody cares, you try to at least go out and maybe do something like this and try to create a little bit more understanding. Is about the only thing I think you maybe can do. Yeah, sure. I admit to it. Okay. Not as often, however. I should say only when I'm on traveling for the Geographic and can afford it. Yes.
You're willing to share with us on what you saw. Now then, this is kind of a follow-through activity, follow-through question with respect to the other one about people not wanting to be photographed. Did you encounter people who wanted to share their plight? Who would say, they understood what you were doing, trying to show, hoping to show?
Well, sure. We have a quote in our story from a Bengali economist, and it's something that, it's kind of a memorable line. It says, the guy says, "We're a nation that has to beg to survive." Okay, and there's a real beggar sort of mentality in a way in Bangladesh. The government wants you to be there. The relief workers want you to be there. Everybody sort of wanted you to be there, thinking that your presence and your photographs might get them more food and more aid. So that sure, there are people who are willing to facilitate your work. They may be relief people, they may be local people, whether they're government officials or whatever. But I don't know. That's not really as important as you might think to people who want to share their plight with you. A lot of times there's the language barrier, all right? And people, you know, I mean, you're not able to communicate with the people. You've got to go through your friends that you make, or your guide, or your interpreter, or whatever, to really, you know, get some information from them. And you're really a stranger. You're a freak. You're light-skinned, and you got all these cameras, and you come up in an automobile, and you know, you're an oddity. So that I always wondered before I went to Bangladesh why Time and Newsweek published so many pictures of people staring blankly at the camera. And I thought, Jesus, these photographers that go over there really aren't very good. They don't dig very deep. They're very superficial people, it seems, who are photographing this thing. And yet, you know, I got over there and I figured out why most of the photographers came back with pictures of people staring at the cameras, because that's what people do. They stare at you. And they stare at you either out of kind of being debilitated by the effects of malnutrition, or they stare at you because you're really a freak. You're like a sideshow that's walking down the street. The Geographic is always after us to bring back interesting pictures of people doing things, whether they're cooking chapatis or weaving something over in the Amana colonies or whatever. But I'll guarantee you walk into an African village or a village in Cambodia, you know, and that's what you're going to see is people, everybody coming out of their house to look at the weird American who's standing here, you know. So that really the case was more trying to put people at ease, try to get the situation back to some semblance of reality so that you could see what was happening and make photographs of as life as it is or was, rather than, you know, people just kind of looking at you, you know, kind of blankly and mindlessly. Yes, ma'am?
You talked about family planning in India. Did
Yeah.
you have an opportunity to determine in some of the other countries?
Well, it's non-existent in so many countries. In Bangladesh, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. There was a guy called the Family Planning Director in the Ministry of Health. He had an office, but that's all. It was him, you know, for a country of 80 million people. One guy. Nothing. In India, of course, the vasectomy program was much touted. 3 years of the vasectomy program and 3 years of dramatic increase in population, not decrease. That didn't work. Very little happening in India. We checked in Kenya. Kenya has a population growth rate of 3.5%. It's one of the highest in the world. India is somewhere around 2.8 or 2.9. And in Kenya, they're after, you know, they're at least there's some sort of a national effort in this regard, billboards and things like that. Now, in Taiwan, there's certainly a national effort to limit the size of families, and and they have all reached a sort of stability in their population. I'm trying to think just quickly where else we saw this emphasized. 2 children or whatever. Well, anyhow, it was quite rare. It was a rare day when people even openly discussed it with us. Yes, sir.
What are your recommendations?
Boy. I think, people have asked me that before, and I think the first thing that maybe we all can do, and I'm glad you have one of your political representatives on his way out here for this week of conferences and symposia, is to really demand of our political representatives some sort of a policy, a food policy here on the part of the United States government. We don't know how much food we grow, or if we do, it's a well-kept secret at times, and we really don't know what we stand for. That food conference in Rome was just so, it seemed to me anyway, personally now, the blatant sort of cynicism that you saw on the part of the United States representatives there at the food conference in Rome was just appalling. The way, Secretary of Agriculture Butts, in the middle of the food conference, dashed over to Egypt to announce this big concessional sale of I don't know how many thousand tons of wheat, and then dashed back to Rome and told the government of Bangladesh that we didn't have any food to give away, and we're already doing enough and so forth. Well, we've really got to decide what we stand for here in the country, and I think first of all we've got to ask our political representatives to come up with some sort of a coherent policy and some planning. It's sure, food, particularly the wheat crop, is our biggest source of foreign exchange. I guess we earned about $20 million with wheat sales last year, but boy, it's very haphazard and scattered as to where this goes and what happens to it. So I think the first thing is some sort of a policy and some planning. You could say that we could eat less beef, and if we all ate one less McDonald's-sized hamburger a week, it's been estimated that we could free about 10 million tons of grain a year. Well, there are no real mechanisms today to transfer that decreased beef consumption into some more grain to either sell on the world market at a pretty good price or to give away in humanitarian aid. So I think we really need some sort of planning and some sort of policy. I guess I've seen some pretty good relief agencies operating in the world. UNICEF seems to be doing about as good a job as any, but I don't think that's really getting to the heart of the thing to say give $20 to Save the Children or $50 to UNICEF. It's a lot more complicated question than that, and it really seems we ought to sit down and decide, number one, what we stand for, since we grow more food than any other country in the world. That's a bad answer to your question, I know, because I've kind of seen the extent of the problem, and I'm not here with any more answers than I think you all have. There's a hand up. Yes.
Did any of the people who've addressed this point before, concerning family planning, in your conversations with these people, say in Africa, in India,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, anybody volunteer to say that we should have fewer children, we should be careful, the man in the street?
Not the man on the street. Sure, the educated people, the bureaucrats, the university people, sure, and then for the most part, even in Bangladesh, they had 1 or 2 children, right? But again, it's attaining a standard of living where having a large family is not a socially desirable goal, but it's the people who have attained a certain social economic status. And even I was surprised, even in a country like Bangladesh, a number of Bengali people that I talked to, they said, sure, my wife and I have 1 child, maybe 2, so that people. But the man on the street, no. I mean, it was like talking about green cheese on Mars, to limit the size of their family, because these children are production units. So many of them die of childhood diseases, one thing or another, and they're needed for Social Security to take care of the parents. So that, no, it's not talking about having fewer, it's talking about having more, if anything. And with the man on the street, the villagers. And it was just amazing to me to see in India some American kids. I'm trying to think what organization they were with. Well, anyway, they were trying to dispense birth control pills, right? And we were in a village, and there was a woman hemorrhaging massively. She'd taken all 27 or 28 pills at once, right? And here's people with 2% literacy level, and try to explain the idea of 1 of these things every day. No way. It just didn't work. It was just. And the other thing is, as an Indian, as a London-educated but Indian doctor, a woman explained to me that many of our contraceptive devices have been, tested and perfected on healthy people, and that, people suffering from some form of malnutrition. And if Lester Brown is right, it's about 1.5 billion people. That's out of 4 billion in the world. That's quite a few. Many of these birth control devices or contraceptive devices really don't work on people suffering from some form of malnutrition. So that it's a very, very complicated question, but it seems to be much more tied in economics than it does in dispensing contraceptives. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. Another question. What's the infant mortality rate in Bangladesh?
I don't know. They have 7 births a minute, and yet they add only a little over 1 million new people a year because the infant mortality rate is so high. So if you would calculate 7 a minute and come up with a figure there, but the net gain is only a little over 1 million a year. The infant mortality rate is pretty high. I mean, Yes, ma'am, over here. Yeah.
Shipping those people who need them without employment. The drought has existed for 6-7 years and it will continue. It doesn't show any signs of stopping. The problem can be solved if somebody is willing to put some money into irrigating the place. They don't have enough money to do it.
Right.
So if we all sit here and think we can do something for them by shipping tons of things tomorrow, 10 years from today, the problem is still there.
I think that's a very well-made point, that I think in the end what we need in so many parts of the world are really developmental projects. Projects to get people to grow food using either their available resources and technology or technology that would sort of fit into their way of life, like irrigation in the desert. But to just get more handouts is not really going to solve the problem, it seems, in many cases. I'm saying that in a very general way, but I think your point is well taken. Yes, sir.
I have a comment and a question.
Mhm.
The comment is that what's happening in most of these countries, especially in Asia, is that when you talk of family planning, your success depends mostly on the media. A country where there are more than 80% of the people live in villages, and most of these villages don't have access to a newspaper, not to talk about radios or televisions. So the family planning doesn't reach the man or the woman who needs it. So the main reason why it's a failure is because of lack of effective communication media. And the question is, do you see a lack of human effort in these countries, apart from the lack of resources and lack of planning
A lack of human effort on whose part?
on the part of the people?
The indigenous people.
Farmers.
Well, no, not really. I mean, it's amazing how ingenious the poor farmer is, and even in a place like Africa, the drought area of Africa. I don't think there's any lack of effort. Quite to the contrary, I get the feeling that there are farmers in many of the hungry nations all over the world just waiting to be given some tools to increase their food production. I saw some farmers in Africa planting millet and sorghum, but they had to plant these things about that far apart because there's so little rainfall. But they were kind of using and they were trying to trap the little available rainfall that there was in Africa in some sort of a primitive irrigation system, a set of canals and everything. And no, I think quite to the contrary, that given that, I think these people, the farmer out there is waiting for the tools. And I really mean this, that in 17 countries, I never met a stupid farmer. They're a hell of a great lot of people, I think. And yes?
I saw some evidence of the Red Cross in these countries. How about the Peace Corps or anything like that?
Well, the Peace Corps has been scaled back to the point where I think it's relatively ineffectual.
Because the people in the Peace Corps are expected to almost work for nothing and do the time and where they might have spent many years in arson.
It's a political decision on the part of the Nixon administration for a large measure to decide that, we're going to do away with the poverty programs, including the Peace Corps. I found a real cadre of ex-Peace Corps workers all over the world. My friends from Ames, Iowa, who run the Save the Children office in Bangladesh and who's without their efforts, my whole trip would have been a failure. They were both ex-Peace Corps people. Went to school here, graduated in 1967, went off to work in the Peace Corps in India. And everywhere in the world you see this cadre of ex-Peace Corps people. They may work for AID, they may work for a private relief agency, but their initial training was in the Peace Corps. And it really seems like a very sad thing that this this Peace Corps effort has been abandoned. Now, sure, you can make a good case for the fact that many of the kids going into the Peace Corps were ill-equipped and untrained to deal with agricultural problems, but no, the Peace Corps is not well on evidence. The only place I saw it was up in northern Thailand, and it was being phased out there too.
But the people were
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, they are. I guess in a general sort of way, they're also growing, trying to grow a third rice crop, and instead of the traditional two, and they're also trying to grow more of the rices developed by the International Rice Research Institute. Chiefly as an export thing, I think. Carl. Well, yes and no. I mean, the Geographic has, in the last 5 or 6 years, hired a lot of young people from newspapers, both writers and photographers. They're trying to do a lot more journalistic sort of stories. They feel an obligation, certainly, to do a story like this. We spend a lot of money on survey research every year to find out who the audience is that reads the Geographic and what their likes and dislikes are. And I can share with you the most recent survey. There are 10 million readers of the National Geographic, and the most recent survey showed that the 10 most popular articles in 1974 included the fantastic polar bears, the incredible goldfish, Yosemite National Park, my life with baboons, hiking the Appalachian Trail. I mean, you get the idea of the kind of articles that people say they remember reading and that they like. The 10 least popular articles last year dealt with the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, and problems like the energy crisis and the oil crisis, to name 2 of the 10 least popular articles. So, Gil Grosvenor, the editor of the magazine, said as we were about to publish this article, he says, I hope you're prepared to have the least popular story in 1975, the story that everybody is really going to hate when they pick up that magazine after dinner and page through here and see this little gal in Bangladesh who's starving to death. And I said, yeah, I'm prepared to do it if you're prepared to publish it, because I really don't care if I'm popular or not. But they want to do more stories like this. And I've been pretty lucky, I guess, to have done the story about the Menominee Indians, the people who wanted their land back and got it back. And it's a departure, but it's also part of a trend to kind of pick up where, say, Life magazine left off. This is the last picture magazine, and if you're not going to do it here, you're not going to do it at all, I guess. Yeah.
Several times you've made points about technology being appropriate to the people. You had a good picture of this brushing machine.
Yeah.
Are there any governments that consider it important enough to put money into it?
Yeah.
The World Bank putting money into it?
Yes, the World Bank, in fact, I was reading in Sunday's Washington Post, the World Bank came out quite recently with a new policy statement that the majority of its effort is going to be channeled into the area of helping the small farmer and things, and in the providing the economic incentives to get the small farmer to increase his yield, and also in the area of land reform and other incentives that would go with that. And I've seen World Bank people in different parts of the world. And to answer your question, yeah.
Yeah, I've read that too, but I haven't seen anything that says they're willing to spend money to build machines that maybe were used here 80 years ago.
Well, that small threshing machine that I showed you, that was in the Philippines. And the Philippine government has put a lot of money into a program called Masagana 99, right? Where they get the small farmer to grow the high-yielding rice, and they get the people, the farmers, organized so that they can get credit to buy seeds and help them market their crops so they get a little better price for it, and to buy these small threshing machines that cost $200-300 a piece, and they're fairly easy to maintain. And I think in the Philippines, it's one place you might look, and Taiwan is another. And I know that most of us think Taiwan is some sort of a relic of a bygone era, and politically it may be, but in terms of agricultural advances and a country that's just turned around dramatically, Taiwan is the great agricultural success in Asia. And, starting with land reform and breaking up with the large farms and the feudal holdings. And I think if you're really interested in this, to really get into what's happened in Taiwan is quite instructive. Oh, all kinds of hands, huh? I caught a question from, okay, back there.
Yeah, one question, talking about the need for these children as production units and Social Security, but what makes these people think that children will be able to take care of themselves, let alone their parents, and their older,
Safety and
what hope do they have to offer them?
safety in numbers. No, they don't. They have very little hope to offer them. In fact, they can't even afford to buy enough food to give them an adequate diet. But it's the idea of a lot of numbers. More. We have 15 kids, 7.5 of them on the average will live, and they'll be there to work the farm and provide for us maybe in our old age. And it really boils down to numbers. Yeah.
Sorry about the land reform. Now, what is it? Taiwan was very important in land reform.
Mhm.
Do you think this is something that, like in India, a place like that, where you say that the farmer, he grows a lot of things in the land, but he has to divide it between the sons and it gets down to smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Certain areas, while other areas it's big areas. What is this trying to get back to the medium for?
Well, I don't know what the optimum size of the farm is. In the case of India, the problem is really more of one of the marketplace, where the government's economic policies really take the incentive out of increasing food production for the farmer, because the Indian government has tried to keep the lid on things. They don't want food riots in Delhi and Bombay and whatever, right? So they have these fair price shops in the city where people can buy rice or wheat at prices well below the real market value of this stuff. And a farmer is required to sell half of his crop to the government for these fair price shops. Well, boy, when you have to sell half of your crop at a loss, that's not a real incentive to go out and break your back to increase your yield, because you're just what's the point of it? So in India, it's more of some really crazy and sort of debilitating economic policies of the government that prevents an increased yield. It's not really land reform is kind of secondary, I think, there. Other questions? Yeah. What did we do? Well, we write about it, but we didn't do anything because we couldn't get in there. I applied for a visa and tried to explain to the liaison office in Washington that it would really be to the advantage of the Chinese for us to come over there, because we wanted to see what had happened to what they'd done in the way of family planning and population control, because after all, it's the most populous country in the world, and they really have the lid on things, apparently. We also wanted to see what they'd done in the way of agricultural successes, because scientists, including Norman Borlaug, who'd been there, have reported some really great things. And they just said no, and with no explanation, no. And a very firm sort of no. So we write about it, kind of in a second-hand way. We report on it. But in the way of photographs, there was no way to get any. Now, we tried through China Pictorial to get some photographs from China, some current ones, and they sent us some that were made in 1955. So these were 20 years old, and we just decided they weren't worth publishing either. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
What is the conclusion of your article in Geographic?
Very pessimistic. There isn't one scientist who says who would offer you even a cautiously worded or halfway optimistic statement. It's very pessimistic that unless something is done with population and affluence, that what we see in Bangladesh is bound to kind of confront us all 2, 3, 4 decades from now. And Borlaug said it best. He says, every scientific advance that we're making at all these research centers, whether it's Ames, Iowa, or over in Los Baños in the Philippines, every scientific advance we make to increase food production is just keeping one half step ahead of this rising population. And that in the end, it's like walking up an escalator that's going down. That sure, we can keep a half a step ahead maybe this year and next year, barring any major crop failure here in the United States, but 10 years from now, no way. There may be a famine of just monstrous proportions, not 100,000 like in Bangladesh, but 100 million. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, how soon will Americans have to change their lifestyle?
Right now, I think. Is that it? Okay.
Do you think these countries should follow the American experiment of birth control pills, or should they follow the Argentine bloc of countries and World Population Conferences? These countries should develop as the evolution of the United States developed, given the population disability.
I think the answer ought to be pretty obvious after what we said tonight. There's no way that you can push birth control pills, pardon the pun, down the throat of people who have a 2% literacy level and you know, have no real hope of a better life and raising their socioeconomic status. That you know, the only way to stem the tide of population, it seems, is through development. That's the only way. Yeah. Okay. That'll work? Yeah. Good, huh?
I'd like to thank Steve Raymer for coming down and sharing his thoughts and pictures with us, and also for all of you for coming on this evening. Just like to remind you there's going to be a panel discussion in this room tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 5 dealing with the subject of hunger and politics as far as the world food situation.